The sound of hooves against packed earth woke Nathan Cross from his shallow sleep, and he knew before he even opened his eyes that someone was leaving in a hurry. He threw off his bedroll and moved to the window of the bunkhouse, pressing his face against the cool glass just in time to see a figure on horseback, disappearing into the darkness beyond the ranch fence. The moon hung low and fat in the New Mexico sky, casting enough light for him to recognize the horse as one from the Lawson stable, which meant the rider was likely Hannah Lawson herself, the rancher's daughter who had arrived just 3 days prior from Boston. Nathan pulled on his boots without bothering to lace them properly and grabbed his hat from the bedpost. The other ranch hands slept on, their snores filling the cramped quarters with a steady rhythm that spoke of exhaustion from another long day. He moved quietly through the room and out into the night air, which carried the scent of sage and dust. Something was wrong. Nobody rode out alone at this hour, not in the summer of 1873, not in territory where Comancheros still occasionally raided, and where a lone traveler could disappear without a trace. He saddled his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper with practiced efficiency. His fingers worked the straps and buckles automatically while his mind ran through possibilities. Hannah had seemed upset at dinner, picking at her food while her father discussed ranch business with the foreman. She had excused herself early, and Nathan had noticed the way her hands trembled as she set down her fork. He had wanted to ask if she was all right, but his position as a hired hand made such personal inquiries inappropriate. Now he wished he had ignored propriety. The trail was easy enough to follow in the moonlight. Hannah was not trying to hide her tracks, which worried him more than if she had been. Either she did not care about being followed, or she did not know enough about this country to understand the danger she was in. Nathan urged Copper into a steady lope, not wanting to push the horse too hard, but knowing he needed to catch up before she got too far from the ranch. The Lawson spread, situated 15 miles outside of Cimarron, New Mexico, was one of the larger operations in Colfax County. But civilization ended quickly once you left the property boundaries. He had been working at the Lawson Ranch for 2 years now, ever since he had drifted into the territory from Texas. At 26, he had already lived more lives than most men twice his age. He had been a drover on the cattle trails, a scout for wagon trains, and once, for a brief and regrettable period, a deputy in a town so small it did not even warrant a name on most maps. The job at the Lawson Ranch had been the first thing that felt like it might stick, the first place where he could imagine putting down roots. The work was honest, the pay was fair, and old Thomas Lawson was a decent man who treated his hands with respect. Hannah was a complication Nathan had not anticipated. Thomas had mentioned his daughter was coming to live at the ranch after finishing her education back east, but Nathan had pictured someone older, more settled. When Hannah had stepped off the stagecoach 3 days ago, she had taken his breath away. She was 22, tall and slender with dark hair that she wore pinned up in the fashion of Eastern ladies. But it was her eyes that had struck him most, a deep green that reminded him of the forests he had known as a child in Tennessee before the war had torn everything apart. Those eyes held intelligence and sadness in equal measure, and Nathan had found himself thinking about her at odd moments throughout his workday. The trail led northeast, away from Cimarron, and toward the rougher country where the foothills began their rise toward the mountains. Nathan felt his concern deepen. This was not good land for a midnight ride, full of arroyos and rock formations that could hide any number of dangers. He pushed Copper a bit faster, standing slightly in the stirrups to scan the darkness ahead. The moon was bright enough that he could see perhaps 100 yards in any direction, but beyond that, The world dissolved into shadows and uncertain shapes. He caught sight of her after another 15 minutes of riding. She was moving at a canter, her posture in the saddle suggesting she was at least a competent rider, but her path was erratic. She seemed to be following no particular route, just putting distance between herself and the ranch. Nathan called out, his voice carrying across the quiet landscape. "Miss Lawson, Hannah." She did not slow down. If anything, she urged her horse faster, and Nathan cursed under his breath. He did not want to frighten her, but he could not let her continue into this dangerous country alone. He gave Copper his head, and the gelding responded with the burst of speed Nathan knew he had in reserve. They closed the distance quickly, and when they were near enough, Nathan called out again. "Miss Lawson, please. It's Nathan Cross from the ranch. You need to stop." This time she did slow, but when she turned to look at him, he saw her face was streaked with tears. Even in the moonlight, he could see the anguish written across her features. She pulled her horse to a halt and sat there, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Nathan brought Copper alongside her and waited, giving her a moment to compose herself. He had learned long ago that sometimes silence was the kindest thing you could offer someone in pain. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "You should not have followed me. Please just go back. Let me go." "Cannot do that, Miss Lawson," Nathan said gently. "This country is not safe for anyone alone at night, let alone a woman who does not know the territory. Whatever is wrong, running off into the darkness is not the answer." "You do not understand," she said, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I cannot go back there. I cannot face him. I cannot pretend everything is fine when it is not." Nathan kept his voice calm and steady. "Who cannot you face? Your father. Thomas is a good man. Whatever is troubling you, I am sure he would listen." Hannah laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. It was bitter and broken, the laugh of someone whose world had shattered. "My father is part of the problem. He brought me out here under false pretenses. He told me I would have a home at the ranch, that I could start fresh after everything that happened in Boston. But tonight at dinner, I learned the real reason he wanted me here. He has arranged a marriage for me. To a man I have never met, a cattle baron from Colorado who is twice my age and looking for a young wife to give him sons." The words hung in the air between them, and Nathan felt anger rise in his chest. He had heard of such arrangements before, fathers treating their daughters like property to be traded for business advantages and social connections. It was not right, no matter how common the practice might be. He looked at Hannah and saw not just a beautiful young woman but a person whose autonomy and future were being stolen from her. "Did your father tell you this himself?" Nathan asked. "I overheard him talking with the foreman after I left the dining room. I could not sleep, so I went to get some water from the kitchen, and I heard them through the office door. He said the man, his name is Garrett something, is arriving in 2 weeks to meet me. Father owes him money, apparently, a great deal of it, and this marriage is how he plans to settle the debt." She wiped at her tears with the back of her hand. "I am 22 years old, and I have already lost everything once. I thought coming here would give me a chance to rebuild my life on my own terms, but I was foolish to hope." Nathan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and placed his hand over hers where it rested on her saddle horn. Her fingers were cold despite the warm night air. "You are not foolish for wanting to control your own life," he said. "That is the most reasonable thing a person can want. But running off into the night without supplies or a plan is not going to get you where you need to be. The nearest town of any size is Santa Fe, and that is 3 days' ride from here. You would not make it alone." "Then what am I supposed to do?" The desperation in her voice cut through him. "Go back and smile and nod and let myself be sold like cattle. You go back tonight." Nathan said, because the alternative is dying out here from thirst or exposure or worse. But going back does not mean giving up. It means you live to fight another day, and you let people who care about your well-being help you find a better solution. She looked at him sharply. You barely know me. Why would you care about my well-being? It was a fair question, and Nathan was not entirely sure he had a good answer. But he tried. I know what it is like to feel trapped. I know what it is like to have other people make decisions about your life without your consent. And I guess I also know that in the 3 days since you arrived at the ranch, I have not been able to stop thinking about you. Which makes me either a fool or someone who recognizes something worth protecting when he sees it. The admission hung between them, vulnerable and honest. Hannah stared at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to determine whether he was sincere. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because some of the tension left her shoulders. I do not want to marry a stranger, she whispered. I do not want to be owned by another man who sees me as a means to an end. Then we will find a way to make sure that does not happen, Nathan said. But first, we need to get you back to the ranch before your absence is discovered. If your father knows you ran off, it will only make everything more complicated. Hannah considered this for a long moment, and then she nodded slowly. All right, but I am holding you to your promise. You said you would help me find another solution. I am a man of my word, Miss Lawson. If we are going to be conspirators, you should probably call me Hannah. Nathan smiled despite the seriousness of the situation. Hannah it is, and you can call me Nathan when we are alone like this. Though around the ranch, we should probably maintain the proprieties. They turned their horses back toward the ranch, riding side by side through the moonlit landscape. The return journey felt different from Nathan's urgent pursuit. There was a companionable quality to the silence now, broken occasionally by quiet conversation as Hannah told him more about what had driven her from Boston to New Mexico in the first place. She had been engaged once before, to a young lawyer from a prominent family. The wedding had been planned, the invitation sent, the dress made. But 2 weeks before the ceremony, Hannah had discovered that her fiancé had been keeping a mistress in an apartment on the other side of the city. When she had confronted him, he had shown no remorse, explaining casually that such arrangements were common among men of his class, and she should not concern herself with his private affairs. Hannah had broken off the engagement immediately, despite the scandal it caused. My mother's family disowned her when she married my father, Hannah explained as they rode. He was beneath her station, you see, just a rancher's son with ambitions. She ran away with him to build a life out here, but she died when I was just a baby. My father sent me back east to be raised by those same relatives who had rejected my mother. They took me in, but they never let me forget that I was there on their charity. And when I broke my engagement and embarrassed them socially, they made it clear I was no longer welcome. So you came to your father, Nathan said. I had nowhere else to go, and foolishly I thought he might actually want me around, that maybe after all these years of being strangers, we could build some kind of relationship. She laughed bitterly. But he just sees me as another asset to be leveraged, another tool to help him maintain his business interests. Nathan was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I have worked for your father for 2 years, and I have never known him to be deliberately cruel, thoughtless maybe. Focused on the ranch to the exclusion of everything else, certainly, but not cruel. Is it possible he thinks he is doing what is best for you, securing your future with a wealthy husband? Even if that is true, it does not give him the right to make that choice for me, Hannah said firmly. My future should be mine to decide. I agree with you completely, Nathan said. I am just trying to understand his thinking so we can figure out how to approach this situation. They fell silent again, and Nathan found himself acutely aware of her presence beside him. In the moonlight, she looked almost ethereal, her dark hair coming loose from its pins to fall around her shoulders. There was strength in the set of her jaw and the straightness of her spine, but also vulnerability in the way she occasionally glanced at him, as if reassuring herself that he was still there. The ranch buildings came into view, dark shapes against the slightly lighter sky. Nathan led them around to the back of the barn where they were less likely to be seen. He helped Hannah dismount and then took both horses to unsaddle and brush down. She stood nearby, watching him work with a curious expression. "You are very good with horses," she observed. "I have been around them most of my life," Nathan said. "They are honest creatures. If you treat them right, they will take care of you. If you treat them poorly, they will let you know in no uncertain terms. I appreciate that kind of straightforward relationship. Unlike people, who lie and manipulate and pretend to care when they really do not," Hannah said. Nathan paused in his work and looked at her directly. "Some people, yes, but not all. There are still folks in this world worth trusting. You just have to be careful about who you give that trust to. And you think you are one of those trustworthy people. I am going to try my best to be worthy of the trust you placed in me tonight when you came back here instead of riding off into certain danger," Nathan said. "Beyond that, I suppose time will tell." He finished with the horses and made sure they both had fresh water. Then he walked Hannah to the back door of the main house, moving quietly to avoid waking anyone. At the door, she turned to face him, and in the darkness of the porch, they stood close enough that he could smell the faint scent of lavender that clung to her skin. "Thank you," she said softly, "for coming after me, for listening, for not treating me like I was being hysterical or foolish." "You were neither of those things," Nathan said. "You were scared and angry and desperate, and those are all reasonable responses to learning your freedom is being taken away. Now get some sleep, and tomorrow we will start figuring out what to do about this situation." Hannah nodded, and then, impulsively, she stood on her toes and kissed his cheek. It was just a brief press of her lips against his skin, but it sent warmth flooding through his entire body. Before he could react, she had slipped through the door and disappeared into the house. Nathan stood there for a long moment, his hand coming up to touch the spot where she had kissed him, and then he smiled in the darkness before heading back to the bunkhouse. The next morning came too early, as it always did on a working ranch. Nathan rose with the other hands and went through his morning routine of washing up at the pump and pulling on his work clothes. His body was tired from the short night and the unexpected ride, but his mind felt strangely alert. He kept thinking about Hannah, about the desperation in her eyes and the determination in her voice when she said she would not be owned. At breakfast in the ranch house kitchen, the hands sat around the long table while the cook, an older woman named Martha who had been with the Lawson family for decades, served up plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits. Thomas Lawson sat at the head of the table, discussing the day's work with his foreman. Hannah was notably absent, which Martha explained away by saying the young miss was feeling tired from the journey and adjusting to the altitude. Nathan caught Martha's eye and saw something there that made him wonder if the older woman knew more than she was letting on. Martha had always been kind to him, often sneaking him extra biscuits or a slice of pie when the other hands were not looking. She had lost her own daughter years ago to fever, and Nathan sometimes wondered if she had adopted him as a sort of surrogate child, though neither of them ever spoke of it directly. After breakfast, Nathan went out to begin his work. He was responsible for checking fence lines in the eastern pastures, a task that was both necessary and tediously time-consuming. He saddled Copper and set out, grateful for the solitude that would let him think through the problem of Hannah's situation without interruption. The sun climbed higher in the sky as he rode, and the day grew hot. New Mexico in August was unforgiving, the heat pressing down like a physical weight. Nathan worked methodically, checking each section of fence for damage or weakness, making mental notes of what would need to be repaired. But his mind kept drifting back to the previous night, to the feeling of Hannah's hand under his and the kiss she had placed on his cheek. He knew he was treading on dangerous ground. She was the ranch owner's daughter, and he was just a hired hand. In the social order of things, he had no business entertaining thoughts about her. But he could not shake the feeling that something significant had happened between them in those moonlit hours. Some connection had been forged that went beyond the usual boundaries of class and circumstance. By the time he returned to the ranch in the late afternoon, Nathan had the beginnings of a plan forming in his mind. It was risky and would require careful execution, but it might give Hannah the freedom she was so desperate to claim. He needed to talk to her, though, to see if she would even be willing to consider such an unconventional solution. His opportunity came that evening after supper. Nathan was in the barn checking on a mare that was close to foaling when he heard the soft rustle of skirts behind him. He turned to find Hannah standing in the doorway, backlit by the fading sunlight so that she appeared almost to glow. "I was hoping I would find you here," she said, glancing over her shoulder to make sure they were alone. "I've been going mad all day, trapped in that house with my father acting as though everything is perfectly normal." "Did he say anything about the marriage arrangement?" Nathan asked, brushing his hands off on his pants and moving closer to her. "Not a word. It is like it is not even happening. He talked about ranch business and asked me inane questions about whether I was settling in comfortably." She pressed her hand to her forehead in frustration. "I wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, but I remembered what you said about not letting him know I had overheard. So I smiled and played the dutiful daughter and felt like I was going to crawl out of my skin." "That took strength," Nathan said. "I know it did not feel like it, but maintaining that composure was the right choice. Did you think of anything, any way out of this?" The hope in her voice was painful to hear because Nathan was not sure his idea was any good at all. "I have been thinking about it all day," he admitted. "And I have one possibility, but I need you to hear me out before you react, because it is going to sound insane." "At this point, I am willing to consider anything," Hannah said. Nathan took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "We could get married, you and me." Hannah stared at him, her mouth falling open in shock. "What? Listen, I know how it sounds. We barely know each other, and I am not the kind of man your father would ever choose for you. But think about it. If you are already married, then your father cannot force you into this arrangement with the cattle baron. The man is coming here to meet his future bride, but if there is no bride available, then the whole deal falls apart." "Nathan, that is crazy," Hannah said, but her tone was thoughtful rather than dismissive. "We do not love each other. Marriage is supposed to be about love, or at least compatibility." "In an ideal world, yes," Nathan agreed. "But we are not living in an ideal world right now. We are living in a world where you are about to be sold to the highest bidder whether you like it or not. This would at least give you control over your own fate." "And what would you get out of it?" Hannah asked, her eyes narrowing slightly. "What do you want from me in exchange for this rescue?" It was a fair question, and Nathan respected her for asking it so directly. "Honestly, I do not know. I have not thought that far ahead. I guess I would get the satisfaction of knowing I helped someone who needed it. And maybe, if we are lucky, we would get the chance to become friends, to build something real out of a situation that started out as pure necessity." Hannah was quiet for a long time, her gaze distant as she worked through the implications. Nathan waited, his heart pounding. He knew he was asking something enormous of her, asking her to take a leap of faith with a man she had only just met. Finally, she spoke. "It would have to be a real marriage. My father would never accept anything less, and neither would this Garrett person. They would look for a way to annul it if they thought it was just a sham." Nathan felt heat rise in his face. "I understand that. I would not ask anything of you that you were not willing to give, but yes, legally and in the eyes of the church, it would have to be binding." "And what happens after? Do we stay married forever? Do we eventually go our separate ways? What are we talking about here?" "I suppose that would be up to us to figure out as we go," Nathan said. "I am not going to stand here and promise you some great love story because I do not think either of us would believe it. But I can promise you honesty and respect. I can promise that I will never use you or treat you as property. Your choices will remain your own." Hannah looked at him for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face. Then she nodded slowly. "All right, let us do it. But we need to do it quickly before my father's business partner arrives. And we need to do it in a way that cannot be easily undone. There is a circuit preacher who comes through Cimarron every few weeks," Nathan said. "I could ride into town tomorrow and see if he is there. If not, there is a justice of the peace who can perform the ceremony." "Tomorrow," Hannah repeated, and Nathan could hear the fear underlying her determination. "This is really happening." "Only if you wanted to," Nathan said gently. "You can still change your mind. We can find another way." "No," Hannah said firmly. "You were right. This gives me control over my fate, and that is worth more than anything else right now. But Nathan, you should know what you are getting into. I am not an easy person. I have opinions and I speak my mind, and I will not be the kind of docile wife who just agrees with everything her husband says." Nathan smiled. "Good. That sounds incredibly boring. I would much rather have someone who challenges me and keeps me on my toes." "Then we have an agreement," Hannah said, and she held out her hand to shake on it as if they were conducting a business transaction. Nathan took her hand, but instead of shaking it, he held it gently in both of his. "We are going to figure this out together," he said. "I promise you that." The next morning, Nathan requested permission from the foreman to ride into Cimarron for supplies. It was not an unusual request. Hands often went into town to pick up items the ranch needed. The foreman agreed easily, and by mid-morning, Nathan was riding toward town with a list of supplies in his pocket and a much more important mission in his mind. Cimarron was a bustling town that served as a hub for the ranchers and miners who worked in the surrounding territory. The streets were dusty and crowded with wagons and horses, and the wooden sidewalks rang with the sound of boots and the murmur of conversation. Nathan tied Copper to a hitching post outside the general store and went inside, quickly purchasing the items on his list. Then he made his way to the small church at the end of the main street. The door was open, and Nathan stepped inside, letting his eyes adjust to the dimness. The interior was simple but clean, with wooden pews and a plain altar at the front. A man in his 50s was sweeping the floor, and he looked up as Nathan approached. "Can I help you, son?" the man asked. "I am looking for the circuit preacher," Nathan said. "Is he in town?" "You are talking to him," the man said with a smile. "Reverend Samuel Mitchell. What can I do for you?" Nathan removed his hat and turned it nervously in his hands. "I need to arrange a wedding as soon as possible." Reverend Mitchell's eyebrows rose. "That is wonderful news. Congratulations." "When were you thinking?" "Tomorrow, if you can manage it. Or even today, if that is possible." The preacher set his broom aside and gave Nathan a more appraising look. "That is quite sudden. Is there some particular reason for the rush? The young lady is not in trouble, is she?" Nathan felt his face flush. "No, nothing like that. It is complicated, but I assure you this is not some impulsive decision we will regret. We both know what we are doing, and we want to be married properly in the eyes of God and the law." Reverend Mitchell studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. I have learned not to judge people's circumstances too harshly. If you say you know what you are doing, I will take you at your word. I can perform the ceremony tomorrow afternoon if you can bring the young lady here. I will need both of you to sign the marriage register, and you will need 2 witnesses." "I can arrange that," Nathan said, relief washing through him. "Thank you, Reverend. You do not know what this means." "I hope it means the beginning of a long and happy life together," the preacher said kindly. "Marriage is hard work, son, but it can also be one of life's greatest blessings if you approach it with honesty and commitment." Nathan left the church and made his way back to the general store, where he purchased one more item that had not been on his original list. It was a simple gold ring, not fancy by any means, but it was all he could afford on a ranch hand's wages. He tucked it safely into his pocket and then collected the supplies and headed back to the ranch. That evening, he found Hannah in the garden behind the main house. She was sitting on a stone bench, staring at the sunset with an expression of profound melancholy. Nathan sat down beside her, and for a moment, they simply watched the sky turn brilliant shades of orange and red. "It is done," he said quietly. "The preacher will marry us tomorrow afternoon. We need to leave here in the morning and ride to Cimarron. We will need witnesses, but I think I know who to ask." Hannah turned to look at him, and he saw that her eyes were red-rimmed as though she had been crying. "This is really happening. Tomorrow I will be married to a man I met less than a week ago." "Are you having second thoughts?" Nathan asked. "Because it is not too late to call this off." "No," Hannah said, though her voice shook slightly. "I am not having second thoughts about marrying you. I am having thoughts about everything that led to this point, about how my life was supposed to go and how different the reality turned out to be. I was supposed to marry for love, Nathan. I was supposed to have a courtship and a proper wedding with my family and friends around me. Instead, I am running away to be married in secret to escape a fate I never asked for." Nathan felt a pang of sympathy so sharp it was almost physical. He reached over and took her hand in his. "I know this is not what you wanted, and I am sorry that circumstances forced you into this choice. But Hannah, it does not have to be just an escape. Maybe it can also be a beginning, a chance to build something good out of a bad situation." She squeezed his hand, and when she looked at him, there was something softer in her expression. "You are a good man, Nathan Cross, better than I probably deserve." "That is where you are wrong," Nathan said firmly. "You deserve someone who sees you as a person, not a possession. Someone who respects your mind and your choices. I might not be wealthy or educated, but I can give you that much at least." They sat together until the last light faded from the sky, and then Hannah stood to go inside. Before she left, she turned back to him one more time. "What time should I be ready tomorrow?" "Early. We should leave before the rest of the ranch is up and about. I will wait for you by the barn." "All right. I will be there." She hesitated, then added, "Nathan, thank you for giving me a choice when no one else would." After she left, Nathan sat alone in the growing darkness, wondering what he had just committed himself to. Marriage was not something he had given much thought to over the years. His life had been too unsettled, too focused on just surviving from one day to the next. But now, in less than 24 hours, he would have a wife. And not just any wife, but a woman who was intelligent and strong-willed and unlike anyone he had ever known. The next morning, Nathan woke before dawn and dressed quietly. He left a note for the foreman saying he was taking a personal day and would be back the following morning. Then he went to the barn and saddled both Copper and the horse Hannah had ridden 2 nights before. He packed saddlebags with supplies for the journey, and then waited in the cool morning air, watching the eastern sky begin to lighten. Hannah appeared just as the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon. She was wearing a simple traveling dress in a deep blue color, and she carried a small bag with her. Her hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and she wore a determined expression that Nathan was beginning to recognize as her way of dealing with fear. "Ready?" he asked, and she nodded. They rode out together as the ranch began to wake up around them. Nathan led them on a path that would take them around the main compound and onto the road to Cimarron, without being easily visible from the main house. His heart was pounding, half expecting someone to call out and stop them, but no one did. Within an hour, they were well away from the ranch and following the dusty road toward town. The ride took most of the morning and they spoke little, each lost in their own thoughts. Nathan found himself stealing glances at Hannah, trying to imagine what their life together might look like. Would they stay at the ranch? He doubted Thomas Lawson would keep him on once he learned his hired hand had married his daughter without permission. They would probably need to leave to find work somewhere else. Nathan had some money saved, enough to keep them going for a few months if they were careful. When they reached Cimarron, Nathan led them directly to the church. Reverend Mitchell was waiting for them, and he greeted them warmly. "You must be the young lady," he said to Hannah. "I am pleased to meet you. Nathan tells me you are both quite certain about this decision." "As certain as we can be, given the circumstances," Hannah said, and Nathan appreciated her honesty. "We still need witnesses," Reverend Mitchell reminded them. "I have that covered," Nathan said. He had asked two friends from town to meet them at the church. The first was a man named William Reeves who ran the livery stable and who had known Nathan for years. The second was William's wife, Elizabeth, who had always been kind to Nathan and who would, he hoped, be a friendly face for Hannah. The couple arrived a few minutes later, and Elizabeth immediately went to Hannah, taking her hands warmly. "I am so pleased to meet you," she said. "Nathan is a good man, one of the best. He helped my William through a difficult time a few years back, and we have never forgotten that kindness." The ceremony itself was brief and simple. They stood before the altar with Reverend Mitchell reading from his prayer book. When he asked if Nathan took Hannah to be his wife, Nathan answered clearly and firmly, "I do." Then it was Hannah's turn, and there was a brief moment where Nathan wondered if she might change her mind, might say no and walk out. But she looked directly at him and said, "I do," with a strength that made his chest tighten. Nathan slipped the gold ring onto her finger, and then Reverend Mitchell pronounced them husband and wife. "You may kiss your bride," he said with a smile. Nathan looked at Hannah uncertainly. They had not discussed this part, but she stepped closer to him and tilted her face up, giving him permission. He bent down and kissed her softly, just a brief press of his lips against hers. But even that small contact sent electricity through him, and when he pulled back, he saw something in her eyes that suggested she had felt it too. They signed the marriage register with William and Elizabeth as witnesses, and just like that, it was done. Nathan Cross and Hannah Lawson were now legally married. Hannah Cross, he supposed she was now, though she had not yet used the name. Elizabeth insisted on taking them to the hotel restaurant for a wedding lunch, and Nathan agreed gratefully. They sat around a table in the modest dining room, and Elizabeth kept up a steady stream of cheerful conversation that helped ease some of the awkwardness. She asked Hannah about where she had come from and what she thought of New Mexico, and Hannah answered politely, though Nathan could see the tension in her shoulders. After lunch, William pulled Nathan aside. "I do not know what circumstances led to this hasty marriage," he said quietly, "but I hope you know what you are doing. That young woman looks scared half to death. She has reason to be scared, Nathan said, but not of me. I am trying to help her escape a worse situation. William nodded slowly. Just remember that marriage is not just about escaping something. Eventually, you have to build something positive in its place. I hope you are prepared for that. I am going to try my best, Nathan said. After saying their goodbyes to William and Elizabeth, Nathan and Hannah stood on the dusty street, and the reality of their situation seemed to settle over them like a weight. "What do we do now?" Hannah asked. "Now we figure out how to tell your father," Nathan said. "And we prepare for the consequences." They rode back to the ranch slowly, arriving in the early evening. The sun was setting again, casting long shadows across the land. As they approached the main house, they saw Thomas Lawson standing on the porch, his arms crossed and his face set in an expression of fury. "Where in the hell have you been?" he demanded as they dismounted. Then his eyes fell on Nathan and his expression darkened further. "Cross, what are you doing with my daughter?" Nathan stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Hannah. "Mr. Lawson, we need to talk to you. Can we go inside?" "You will explain yourself right here, right now," Thomas said, his voice rising. "I've been worried sick all day not knowing where Hannah was, and now I find her riding in with one of my ranch hands like it is the most natural thing in the world." Hannah moved to stand beside Nathan, her chin lifted defiantly. "Father, Nathan and I were married today. He is my husband now." The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas Lawson stared at his daughter as if she had just spoken in a foreign language. Then his face went red, and Nathan tensed, ready to intervene if the older man became violent. "You did what?" Thomas whispered, and the quiet intensity of his voice was somehow more frightening than if he had shouted. "We were married this afternoon in Cimarron by Reverend Mitchell," Hannah said. "It is legal and binding, and there is nothing you can do to change it. Why would you do this?" Thomas asked, and now there was pain in his voice alongside the anger. "Why would you throw yourself away on a ranch hand? I have been trying to arrange a good future for you, with a man of means who could give you security and comfort." "You mean you were trying to sell me to pay off your debts?" Hannah shot back. "I heard you talking with your foreman the other night. I know about Garrett and your arrangement. Did you really think I would just go along with it? That I would let you trade me like property?" Thomas looked stricken. "You were not supposed to know about that. Not yet. I was going to explain everything when the time was right." "When would the right time have been, Father? When he showed up to claim his prize? When you walked me down the aisle to marry a stranger?" Hannah's voice broke. "I came here thinking I could start over, that I could build a relationship with you after all these years. But you see me the same way everyone else does. Just a tool to be used for your benefit." "That is not true," Thomas said, but his protest sounded weak. "I was trying to do what was best for you." "You were trying to do what was best for yourself," Hannah said. "But it does not matter now. I have made my choice and I choose Nathan. He has shown me more respect and kindness in 4 days than you have in my entire life." Nathan spoke up then, keeping his voice calm and respectful despite the tension. "Mr. Lawson, I understand this is not what you wanted for your daughter, and I know I am not the man you would have chosen, but I can promise you that I will take care of her. I will work hard to provide for her, and I will never treat her as anything less than my equal partner." "You are a ranch hand with no prospects and no future," Thomas said bitterly. "What kind of life can you offer her?" "An honest one," Nathan said. "And one where she has a say in her own destiny." Thomas looked between them, and Nathan could see the man struggling with his emotions. Finally, he seemed to deflate, the anger draining out of him to be replaced by a profound weariness. "You are fired, Cross. I want you off my property by morning." "Father, no," Hannah said. If Nathan leaves, I go with him." "Then go," Thomas said, and his voice was cold. "If you want to tie yourself to a man with nothing, that is your choice, but do not come crying to me when you realize what you have thrown away." He turned and walked into the house, slamming the door behind him. Hannah stood very still, and Nathan saw a single tear slide down her cheek. He reached for her hand, and she gripped his tightly. "I am sorry," he said softly. "I know that was hard." "I thought part of me hoped he would understand," she said. "That he would see I was serious and accept it, but he just sees this as another betrayal." "Give him time," Nathan said. "He is angry and hurt right now, but he is still your father. Maybe eventually he will come around." They went to the bunkhouse where Nathan gathered his few possessions into a bedroll. The other ranch hands were there, and they watched with curious eyes but said nothing. Nathan had never been particularly close with most of them, keeping to himself more often than not. When he finished packing, he turned to find Hannah waiting for him outside. "Where will we go?" she asked. "I have enough money saved for us to stay at the boarding house in Cimarron for a while," Nathan said. "And I will find work. I am a good hand with cattle and horses. Someone will hire me." They rode back to Cimarron in the darkness, a married couple with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the horses they rode. Nathan felt the weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders. He had a wife to provide for now, a woman who had given up everything because he had promised to help her. He could not let her down. The boarding house in Cimarron was run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson who let rooms by the week. Nathan paid for one of her better rooms, which still was not much more than a bed, a washstand, and a small window overlooking the street. But it was clean and private, and after the tumult of the day, that was enough. Hannah set down her bag and looked around the small space that was now their home. Nathan stood awkwardly by the door, suddenly unsure of himself. They were married, but they were also strangers. The intimacy implied by sharing a room felt overwhelming. "I can sleep on the floor," Nathan offered. "Or I can see if Mrs. Patterson has another room available." Hannah turned to look at him, and he saw his own uncertainty reflected in her eyes. "We are married," she said. "We cannot avoid sharing a room forever. Besides, we cannot afford to waste money on 2 rooms when one will do." "I just want you to feel comfortable," Nathan said. "I meant what I said about not asking anything of you that you are not ready to give." Hannah nodded slowly. "I appreciate that. But Nathan, this marriage is real. We both agreed to that, and I am not naive about what that means. I just need some time to adjust to everything. It has been an overwhelming few days." "Take all the time you need," Nathan said. He moved his bedroll to the far side of the room and began to spread it out on the floor. "Nathan, do not be ridiculous," Hannah said. "The bed is big enough for both of us. We are adults. We can share a bed without it having to mean anything more than sleep." So they did. Nathan lay on his back on one side of the bed, still fully dressed except for his boots, while Hannah lay on the other side in her chemise and petticoat. There was a careful space between them, neither of them crossing the invisible line that divided the narrow mattress. But Nathan was intensely aware of her presence, of the sound of her breathing in the darkness and the warmth radiating from her body. "Nathan." Hannah's voice was soft in the darkness. "Yes, thank you for everything. I know this was not what you signed up for when you came after me that night. You could have just brought me back to the ranch and washed your hands of the whole situation." "I could not have done that," Nathan said. "Not once I knew what you were facing. I do not claim to be any kind of hero, Hannah, but I could not stand by and let you be forced into something against your will, not if there was anything I could do to prevent it." "Why?" she asked. "You barely knew me. You still barely know me." "What made you care so much?" Nathan was quiet for a moment, trying to find the right words. "I suppose because I recognized something in you. a kind of trapped desperation that I have felt myself at various points in my life. And maybe because the moment I saw you step off that stage coach, something in me shifted, like I had been waiting for you without knowing it." He paused, then added, "That probably sounds foolish." "No," Hannah said softly. "It does not sound foolish at all. I felt something too that first day. I thought you were handsome, of course, but it was more than that. You looked at me like I was a person, not just an ornament or a problem to be solved. It was the first time in a long time that I felt seen." They fell silent after that, but it was a comfortable silence. Eventually, Nathan heard Hannah's breathing slow and deepen as she fell asleep. He lay awake a while longer, thinking about the strange path that had led him to this moment. Then he too slipped into sleep, more content than he had been in years despite the uncertainty of their situation. The next morning, Nathan left Hannah sleeping and went out to find work. He spent the day going from ranch to ranch in the surrounding area, offering his services. His reputation as a good worker was known locally, and by afternoon, he had secured a position with a cattle operation about 10 miles south of Cimarron. The pay was not as good as what Thomas Lawson had given him, but it would be enough to keep them fed and housed. When he returned to the boarding house, he found Hannah had spent the day making their room more livable. She had bought fabric from the general store and was sewing curtains for the window. There was also fresh bread and cheese on the table, along with some apples. "I found work," Nathan announced, unable to keep the pride from his voice. "I start Monday at the Flying W Ranch. It is a good outfit, and the foreman seemed pleased to have me." Hannah smiled, and it was the first genuine smile he had seen from her since this whole situation began. "That is wonderful news. I went to the general store today and asked if they needed help. The owner said his wife has been wanting someone to help with the bookkeeping, so I am going to meet with her tomorrow." "You do not have to work," Nathan said. "I can provide for us." "I know I do not have to," Hannah said, "but I want to. I am not going to sit around all day doing nothing when I could be contributing. Besides, I am actually quite good with figures. My aunt insisted I study mathematics along with all the usual female accomplishments." That night, they ate their simple meal together and talked about their plans for the future. It was strange but also comfortable, this easy domesticity they were building. Nathan found himself relaxing around her, and he noticed that Hannah seemed less guarded as well. Over the following weeks, they fell into a routine. Nathan worked long days at the Flying W Ranch, often leaving before dawn and not returning until evening. Hannah took the position helping with the bookkeeping at the general store, and she proved to be so competent that, within a week, the owner was asking her advice on various business matters. In the evenings, they would have dinner together and talk about their days, slowly learning each other's histories and personalities. Nathan discovered that Hannah was funny in a dry, clever way. She had a sharp tongue and did not suffer fools, but she was also deeply kind to those she cared about. She told him stories about growing up in Boston, about the suffocating social conventions and the constant pressure to be someone she was not. He shared his own history, about growing up in Tennessee before the war and losing his family to the violence that had consumed the South. He told her about his years drifting, trying to find a place where he felt like he belonged. "I think maybe I have found it," he said one night as they sat on the porch of the boarding house watching the stars. "Or at least the person who makes anywhere feel like home." Hannah looked at him, her expression soft in the starlight. "I feel the same way. It is strange. We barely know each other, and yet I feel more comfortable with you than I ever did with people I had known for years back in Boston." "Maybe that is because we started with honesty," Nathan said. "We did not have time for pretense or games. We both laid our cards on the table from the beginning." Maybe, Hannah agreed. She hesitated, then reached over and took his hand. It was not the first time they had held hands, but there was something different about it this time. Something more intentional. Nathan, I want you to know that I do not regret marrying you. I know it was born out of necessity, but it has become something more than that, at least for me. Nathan felt his heart start to pound. For me too. Hannah, I am falling in love with you. I know it is fast, and maybe it is crazy, but it is true. You are the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing I think about before I sleep. And somewhere along the way, this stopped being just about helping you and started being about building a real life together. Hannah squeezed his hand. I am falling in love with you too. I was not sure if I would ever feel this way about anyone after what happened in Boston. I thought maybe I was broken, incapable of the kind of trust that love requires. But you have shown me that I am not broken. That I can trust again if the person is worthy of it. And you are, Nathan. You are so worthy. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and kissed her. This kiss was different from the brief, formal kiss at their wedding. This was real and deep and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. Maybe we should go inside, Hannah whispered, and Nathan understood what she was offering. They had been married for nearly a month, but they had still not fully consummated the union. They had been giving each other space, waiting for it to feel right. That night, they came together as husband and wife in truth, and it was tender and sweet and perfect. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, and Nathan felt a completeness he had never experienced before. This was what it meant to be whole, he realized. Not just existing on your own, but being part of something bigger than yourself. In the weeks that followed, their love continued to grow and deepen. They learned each other's bodies and rhythms, discovering what brought pleasure and what brought comfort. But more than that, they learned each other's minds and hearts. Nathan learned that Hannah was afraid of thunderstorms because she had nearly been struck by lightning as a child. Hannah learned that Nathan had a beautiful singing voice that he only shared when he thought no one was listening. They saved their money carefully, beginning to plan for a future beyond the boarding house. Nathan wanted to buy land someday, to build his own small ranch where he could raise horses. Hannah wanted to help, to be a true partner in the venture. They spent evenings poring over maps and newspaper advertisements, dreaming together about what their lives might become. 3 months after their wedding, on a crisp October morning, Hannah woke up feeling ill. At first, they worried it might be something serious, but when the nausea continued for several days and was accompanied by other symptoms, they realized what was happening. Hannah was pregnant. The news filled Nathan with a mixture of joy and terror. He was going to be a father. He, who had never had a stable home or family of his own, was going to be responsible for a child. Hannah seemed both excited and scared, and they spent hours talking about what this would mean for them. We need more space, Hannah said practically. We cannot raise a baby in a single room at a boarding house. I know, Nathan agreed. I have been saving as much as I can, but it is not enough yet for land. Maybe we could rent a small house. They found a tiny cabin on the outskirts of Cimarron that was available for a reasonable monthly rent. It was not much, just 2 rooms and a kitchen area, but it had a small yard and was in good repair. They moved in the following week, and Hannah immediately set about making it feel like a home. She sewed curtains and tablecloths, and Nathan built her shelves for her growing collection of books. Life took on a new rhythm. Nathan continued working at the Flying W Ranch, and the foreman was pleased enough with his work to give him a small raise. Hannah had to stop working at the general store as her pregnancy advanced. But the owner's wife continued to come by with small sewing projects that Hannah could do from home for extra money. As winter set in and Hannah's belly grew round, they spent long evenings by the fire, talking about names and making plans. Nathan built a cradle from scraps of wood, sanding it carefully until it was smooth enough that it would not catch on a baby's delicate skin. Hannah knitted tiny blankets and sewed small gowns, her hands never idle. One evening in late December, Nathan came home to find Hannah standing at the window, staring out at the snowy landscape with tears streaming down her face. He immediately went to her, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his hands on her swollen belly. "What is wrong?" he asked gently. "I was just thinking about my father," Hannah said, "wondering if he ever thinks about me, if he knows he is going to be a grandfather. Part of me wants to send him a letter to try to mend the rift between us." "Then do it," Nathan said. "Life is too short to carry grudges. You only get one father, and despite everything, I know you love him." Hannah turned in his arms to face him. "Would you be all right with that? After everything he said to you, everything he did?" "I was never angry at your father for his sake," Nathan said. "I was angry on your behalf because he hurt you, but if reaching out to him would make you happy, then I am all for it. And maybe meeting his grandchild will help him see that we built something good here." Hannah wrote the letter that evening, and Nathan rode into town the next morning to post it. They did not know if Thomas would respond, but at least the door was open. Hannah went into labor on a cold night in February 1874. Nathan rode hard to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Hendricks, who had delivered half the babies in Colfax County. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Nathan feared he might lose both Hannah and the baby. He paced outside the bedroom door, praying to a God he was not sure he believed in, making bargains and promises if only they would both be all right. Finally, as dawn was breaking, he heard the sound he had been waiting for, a baby's cry, strong and insistent. Mrs. Hendricks opened the door with a smile. "You have a son, Mr. Cross, a healthy baby boy, and your wife is tired but doing well. You can come in now." Nathan entered the room on shaky legs. Hannah was propped up on pillows, her hair damp with sweat and her face exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had knitted. Nathan approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. "Come meet your son," Hannah said softly. Nathan sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby. He had a shock of dark hair and his tiny fist was curled against his cheek. As Nathan watched, the baby's eyes opened, revealing a deep blue that would probably change as he grew. But in that moment, looking into his son's eyes, Nathan felt his entire world shift and realign. "He is perfect," Nathan whispered. "What should we name him?" Hannah asked. They had discussed several possibilities over the months, but now that the baby was here, Nathan knew exactly what felt right. "Thomas," he said, "after your father, maybe it can be a bridge between us and him." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. Every boy deserves to be named after someone who has the potential for strength and integrity, even if they have not always lived up to it. And who knows? Maybe your father will see this as an olive branch." So Thomas Nathan Cross came into the world, and he transformed everything. The tiny cabin suddenly felt full of life and purpose. Nathan had never known that such a small creature could require so much attention and energy, but he threw himself into fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to everything else. He got up with Hannah for nighttime feedings, walking the floor with the baby when he was fussy. He changed nappies and sang lullabies and discovered a capacity for love he had not known he possessed. Hannah was a natural mother, patient and nurturing but also practical. She had no illusions about the romance of motherhood, but she embraced all aspects of it with good humor. She and Nathan worked as a team, supporting each other through the exhaustion and adjustment of those early weeks. 2 months after Thomas was born, they received a response to Hannah's letter. It came on a Saturday morning when Nathan was home from work. The envelope was addressed to Hannah in a bold, masculine hand. She opened it with trembling fingers while Nathan held the baby. The letter was not long, but what it said was enough. Thomas Lawson wrote that he had been a fool, that his pride had nearly cost him his only child. He asked if he could come to visit, to meet his grandson and to try to make amends. He did not expect forgiveness, he wrote, but he hoped for the chance to be part of their lives going forward. Hannah looked up from the letter with tears streaming down her face. He wants to meet Thomas. He wants to apologize. Then invite him, Nathan said. Family is important and our son deserves to know his grandfather. Thomas Lawson arrived 2 weeks later, riding up to their cabin with a humility that Nathan had never seen in him before. The proud rancher looked older and more worn than Nathan remembered. But when Hannah opened the door, Thomas's face crumpled and he reached for his daughter. "I am so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I was wrong about everything. I was thinking about money and status when I should have been thinking about your happiness. Can you forgive a foolish old man?" Hannah embraced her father and they both cried. Nathan stood back, giving them space for their reunion while he held the baby. After a few minutes, Hannah turned and gestured for Nathan to come closer. "Father, meet your grandson, Thomas Nathan Cross." The older man's eyes widened when he heard the name. "You named him Thomas." "Nathan suggested it," Hannah said, looking at her husband with love. "He said every boy deserves to carry a name that represents strength and integrity." Thomas Lawson turned to Nathan and there were tears in his eyes. "I was wrong about you, Cross. Nathan. You are a better man than I gave you credit for, better than I have been. Can you forgive me for the way I treated you?" Nathan shifted the baby carefully and then held out his hand. "There is nothing to forgive. You were trying to protect your daughter the only way you knew how. I just wish you could have seen that she did not need that kind of protection. She needed freedom and respect." Thomas shook his hand firmly and then looked back at Hannah. "You chose well, daughter. This is a good man." The visit lasted several days, and by the time Thomas left, relationships had been mended. He offered to help them financially, but Nathan refused, wanting to make his own way. Thomas respected that, but he did offer Nathan his old job back at the ranch if he ever wanted it. Nathan said he would think about it, but for now, he was happy where he was. As young Thomas grew, he brought his parents endless joy. He was a happy baby who rarely cried and who seemed fascinated by everything around him. Nathan would carry him around the cabin and the yard, narrating everything they saw, telling him about horses and cattle and the big wide world he would someday explore. Hannah returned to part-time work at the general store once the baby was a bit older, bringing Thomas with her in a basket. The customers adored him, and Hannah found that motherhood had not diminished her sharp mind for business. In fact, the store owner began consulting her on more and more decisions, until she was essentially running much of the day-to-day operations. A year after Thomas was born, Nathan got an unexpected offer. The foreman at the Flying W Ranch was retiring, and the owner asked Nathan if he would consider taking the position. It came with better pay and a small house on the ranch property. Nathan discussed it with Hannah, and they decided to take the opportunity. The house was bigger than their cabin, with 3 bedrooms and a proper kitchen, and there was space for Hannah to have a garden. They moved to the Flying W Ranch in the spring of 1875. Thomas Lawson helped them move their belongings, and the 2 men worked side by side to get the house ready. Nathan noticed that Thomas and Hannah had developed a genuine relationship, talking and laughing together in a way they never had before. It pleased him to see it. Family was important, and he was glad that young Thomas would grow up knowing his grandfather. As foreman, Nathan had more responsibility but also more authority. He was able to implement some of the ideas he had been forming over his years of ranch work, improving systems and processes that made the work more efficient. The ranch hands respected him because he never asked them to do anything he would not do himself, and because he was fair in his dealings. Hannah thrived as well. She started keeping bees and selling honey at the general store. She also began teaching some of the ranch children to read and write, holding informal lessons in their parlor twice a week. Nathan loved watching her with the children, seeing how patient and creative she was in helping them learn. 2 years after Thomas was born, Hannah became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and she remained active almost until the end. Their second child was born on a beautiful autumn day in 1876, a daughter they named Sarah Marie. She had her mother's green eyes and what promised to be her father's dark hair. Young Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help care for her. Nathan would find him sitting beside the cradle, singing to her in his childish voice, and his heart would swell with pride. This was what he had always wanted without knowing it: a family, a home, people who loved him and whom he loved in return. The years passed in a blur of hard work and simple pleasures. Nathan rose through the ranks to eventually become part owner of the Flying W Ranch when the original owner decided to retire. With Thomas Lawson's help securing a loan, Nathan was able to buy into the operation. It was a risk, but it paid off. The ranch prospered under Nathan's management, and within a few years, they had paid off the loan and were turning a healthy profit. Hannah became known throughout the county as a talented teacher, and eventually, the town of Cimarron asked her to help establish a proper school. She accepted the position, balancing her work with raising their growing family. They had 2 more children after Sarah, another boy named James, and finally a daughter named Elizabeth. Thomas Lawson was a constant presence in their lives, visiting often and spoiling his grandchildren shamelessly. The rift that had once existed between him and Hannah healed completely, replaced by a relationship built on mutual respect and genuine affection. He and Nathan became not just family but true friends, working together on various cattle ventures and supporting each other through the challenges that came with ranching. As Nathan approached 40, he sometimes paused to reflect on the strange path his life had taken. From a drifting cowboy with no prospects to a successful ranch owner with a beautiful wife and 4 healthy children. It all traced back to that night when he had heard hoofbeats in the darkness and made the decision to follow. The decision to help a desperate young woman who was running from a fate she had not chosen. Hannah often told their children the story of how their parents met, though she edited out some of the more difficult parts until they were older. The children loved hearing about how their father had ridden through the night to bring their mother back to safety, and how that act of kindness had led to a love that transformed both their lives. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nathan took Hannah riding out to the spot where he had first caught up with her that moonlit night. They left the children with Thomas Lawson and spent the day together, just the 2 of them, remembering how far they had come. "You ever regret it?" Nathan asked as they sat on a blanket watching the sunset. "Marrying me on such short notice, giving up the possibility of a different life." Hannah looked at him with surprise. "How could I regret the best decision I ever made? Nathan, you gave me my life back. You gave me the freedom to choose my own path, and then you walked that path beside me. Everything good I have, everything I am, is because you saw me as a person worth saving." "You saved yourself," Nathan said. "I just provided an alternative option." We saved each other, Hannah corrected. You were drifting, remember, looking for a place to belong, and I was trapped, unable to see a way forward. We gave each other purpose and partnership. That is what marriage should be. Nathan pulled her close and kissed her temple. I love you, Hannah Cross. More than I thought it was possible to love anyone. I love you too, Nathan. Thank you for following me that night. Thank you for bringing me back to safety. And thank you for every day since then. They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the New Mexico sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. Two people who had found each other in the darkest moment and had built a life filled with light. The Wild West could be a harsh and unforgiving place, but it could also be a land of second chances and new beginnings. And Nathan and Hannah had seized their chance with both hands, creating something beautiful and lasting from what had started as desperation and necessity. Their children grew up strong and happy, learning the values of hard work and integrity from their parents. Young Thomas eventually took over the ranch operation when Nathan was ready to step back, running it with the same dedication and fairness his father had shown. Sarah became a teacher like her mother, opening her own school in a nearby town. James became a veterinarian, using his natural affinity for animals to help ranchers throughout the territory. And Elizabeth married a young lawyer and moved to Santa Fe, where she became involved in women's suffrage work. Nathan and Hannah grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They became known throughout Colfax County as a model couple, people who had built their success through partnership and mutual respect. When people asked them the secret to their long and happy marriage, they always gave the same answer: honesty, respect, and the willingness to take a chance on each other, even when the odds seemed impossible. Thomas Lawson lived to see all 4 of his grandchildren reach adulthood, and to meet several great-grandchildren before he passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78. His death hit the family hard, but they took comfort in knowing he had spent his final years surrounded by love and family. Nathan spoke at the funeral, talking about how Thomas had taught him that it was never too late to admit you were wrong and to make amends. That even proud men could learn humility when they opened their hearts. As Nathan and Hannah entered their 60s, they finally retired from active work and built a smaller house on a piece of land overlooking the valley. They spent their days reading, gardening, and visiting their children and grandchildren. Nathan still rode every day, needing the connection with horses that had been part of his identity for so long. Hannah wrote letters to their extended family and worked on a memoir about their life together, wanting to leave a record for future generations. On a warm summer evening, when they had been married for 45 years, they sat on their porch watching another spectacular sunset. Nathan held Hannah's hand, his thumb tracing the gold ring that had grown thin with decades of wear. "I was just thinking," Hannah said, "about that scared girl riding away into the night all those years ago. She had no idea what was waiting for her. No idea that the man following her would become her whole world." "I was thinking about that too," Nathan admitted. "About the choices we make in moments of crisis and how they echo through our entire lives. I could have just reported to your father that you had run off. I could have minded my own business, but something told me to follow you, to make sure you were safe." "Thank God you listened to that something," Hannah said. "Look at everything that came from that one decision. 4 children, 12 grandchildren so far, and a love that has sustained us through everything life threw at us." "You think we would have found each other if circumstances had been different?" Nathan wondered. "If your father had not tried to force you into that marriage, if you had not run away that night?" Hannah considered the question seriously. "I would like to think so. I would like to believe that some connections are inevitable, that we were always meant to find each other. But honestly, I do not know. Maybe fate only gives us the opportunity and it is up to us to seize it. Then I am grateful we seized it, Nathan said. I am grateful for every single day I have had with you, even the hard days, even the days when we argued or struggled. Because they were all part of building this life together. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, and the stars began to appear. The same stars that had lit Nathan's way that long-ago night when he had followed Hannah into the unknown. The same stars that had witnessed the beginning of their story, and that would continue to shine long after they were gone. Nathan thought about all the young people out there, scared and desperate, trying to find their way in a world that often seemed determined to crush their spirits. He hoped they would find their own version of what he and Hannah had found. Someone who saw them for who they really were. Someone who offered not a cage disguised as safety, but true freedom and partnership. Someone willing to ride through the darkness to bring them home. "Are you ready to go inside?" Hannah asked, squeezing his hand gently. "In a minute," Nathan said. "I just want to sit here with you a bit longer, counting my blessings." Hannah rested her head on his shoulder, and they stayed that way until the moon rose full and bright, illuminating the land they loved and the life they had built together. A life that had started with a desperate escape and a compassionate pursuit, and had grown into something neither of them could have imagined. A true partnership forged in crisis, and tempered by time into something unbreakable. A love story written across the wild landscape of New Mexico, testament to the power of choice and courage, and the simple act of seeing another person's humanity when they needed it most. And there, under the vast western sky, with 45 years of marriage behind them and whatever time remained ahead, Nathan and Hannah Cross sat together in perfect contentment. Two souls who had found each other in the darkness and had spent a lifetime walking toward the light together. Their story was complete, their love had endured, and the legacy they left in their children and grandchildren would continue long after they were gone. The cowboy who had followed the fleeing woman through the night had indeed brought her back to safety. But more than that, he had brought her home to a life filled with love, purpose, and the freedom she had always deserved. And she had given him the same gift in return. It was, in every way that mattered, a happily ever after.